I need to get this off my chest because even months later, I can still hear my boss's voice saying it. You'll get nothing. Imagine putting in everything, your nights, your weekends, your sanity, to save a client that literally kept hundreds of people employed, and then being told you don't deserve a cent of the promised $100,000 bonus. If you're into real stories where arrogance meets karma, stick with me till the end. You won't regret it. It started as a whisper in the office. Bonuses were being restructured after a brutal quarter, and leadership wanted to dangle a giant carrot to keep people grinding. A six-figure payout if we saved a flagship client that was seconds away from walking. I wasn't even supposed to lead that project. I was the safe pair of hands, the guy you gave impossible spreadsheets and compliance nightmares to. But when the client threatened to pull $30 million in revenue, everyone suddenly looked at me. You're methodical, you don't panic, you understand the op stack better than anyone else, my director said. Translation: if you fail, we'll make sure you're the one who takes the fall. So I did it. I didn't just keep the account. I rebuilt their entire trust in us. I mapped out every service gap, pulled 12-hour days with my tiny team, and rewrote processes that had been broken for years. I sat on calls at 2 a.m. with their CFO, explained why things had gone wrong, and then backed it up with fixes that worked. By the time the quarter ended, the client had signed a 3-year renewal. Leadership celebrated with champagne in the boardroom. I wasn't invited, but my name was on every deliverable, every presentation, every late-night update email. The bonus, supposedly locked, here's where things get ugly. A month later, I asked my boss, let's call her Martha, about the payout timeline. She smiled. That tight corporate smile you only see when someone's about to stab you in the back. Oh, that bonus? It doesn't apply to you. You were just supporting the team. I stared at her. Supporting? I was the team. She shrugged. Doesn't matter. The pool was discretionary and you're not on the list. She actually leaned back in her chair like a villain in a bad movie and added, You'll get nothing. I remember walking out of her office feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. It wasn't just the money. It was what it meant. Rent, my dad's medical bills, the fact that for the first time in years, I had allowed myself to believe hard work might actually pay off. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, staring at the screen while the office buzzed around me like nothing had happened. That's when I realized either I swallowed it and became the guy everyone exploited forever, or I started writing everything down, every email, every Slack message, every policy update, every discrepancy in the payroll portal. If you've ever been screwed over by a boss, you know exactly what that moment feels like. The quiet click when rage turns into precision. What Martha didn't know was that I already had the smoking gun, an email from the VP of Sales, CCing her, literally stating that I would receive the full bonus if the client renewed. Signed, time-stamped, corporate letterhead. She hadn't even bothered to delete it from the chain before cutting me out. HR, of course, played dumb when I asked about it. We don't have the finalized paperwork in our system. Right, because someone had made sure the system reflected a different story. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten, I just smiled, nodded, and kept collecting receipts. My boss thought she'd buried me. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the shovel. When companies make promises, they don't write them in ink. They write them in smoke and hope you forget the shape of it by the time it clears. But I didn't forget, because I was there when that $100,000 bonus wasn't just dangled. It was locked into writing. It began with an all-hands meeting the quarter before the crisis. Everyone knew the flagship client, let's call them Northbridge Capital, was restless. They were our golden goose, accounting for nearly a third of our revenue. Losing them would have gutted us. The executives knew it, and they needed someone to play hero. The chief revenue officer stood up in front of 200 people and said, Whoever leads the team that saves Northbridge will get a 6-figure performance payout. Those were his words. No hedging, no maybes. He even smirked and added, Think of it as a once-in-a-career kind of bonus. Everyone clapped, half joking about quitting their jobs to jump on the project. But when the dust settled, nobody actually volunteered. Why? Because Northbridge was toxic. Their account managers had churned 3 times in 2 years. Their CFO sent emails in all caps. Their CEO openly mocked us on LinkedIn. Taking them on was like stepping into a burning house with a spray bottle. That's why my boss shoved me into it. You're detail-oriented, she said. Translation, if you burn, we can find another. Still, there it was. Proof number 1, a recorded company-wide announcement. HR even circulated a PDF afterward with Special Incentive Policy, Q3 Renewal Campaign stamped at the top. It spelled it out. Successful renewal. $100,000 discretionary payout. My name wasn't on the PDF, of course, but neither was anyone else's, as it was tied to results, not titles. Then came the emails. When the crisis hit its peak, our VP of Sales sent a frantic message. If OP pulls this off, he gets the full bonus. Guess who was CC'd? Martha, my boss. She didn't object. She didn't even hedge. She replied, agreed. Let's get this across the finish line. That's Exhibit B. And then there were the Slack threads. Midnight status updates where Martha herself tagged me. OP has point on this. Everyone, follow his lead. Those threads lived in our project channel for months. They weren't just acknowledgments. They were digital fingerprints of her own reliance on me. I even had calendar invites. You laugh, but those matter. Every executive war room call had me listed as presenter. Not Martha. Not her little circle of sycophants. Me. I was the one screen-sharing models, showing risk assessments, fielding Northbridge's CFO's rage while everyone else muted themselves like cowards. And the client? They weren't shy about giving credit. I had an email from their COO saying, "We renewed because of your leadership. If we dealt with anyone else, we would have walked." That wasn't flattery. That was a loaded gun pointed straight at the narrative my boss was trying to rewrite. But here's the part that made me clench my jaw so hard I chipped a molar. After we saved Northbridge and secured the renewal, Martha started shifting the story. At first, it was subtle. In leadership debriefs, she used we instead of he. Then it was my team. By the time champagne was flowing in the boardroom, she was dropping phrases like, "I pulled late nights coordinating this renewal." I wasn't in that room. I was still on the phone with Northbridge, walking them through final contract language. Martha was clinking glasses while I was calming down a billionaire's tantrum. Guess which one leadership remembers when the bonus pool comes around? That's when the gaslighting began. HR told me the forms for my bonus weren't in the system. The incentive hadn't been finalized. I reminded them of the all-hands announcement, the circulated PDF. Those documents were preliminary, they said. Preliminary. Like a contract signed in front of half the company was just a draft. But smoke leaves residue, and I was holding buckets of it. Here's the thing. I could have screamed. I could have raised hell, stormed into offices, threatened lawsuits. That's what Martha expected me to do, lose my temper and look unprofessional. Instead, I went quiet. I started building what I now call my insurance binder. Every screenshot, every forwarded email, every draft of the policy saved with version history. I even exported Slack channels with timestamps, noting who said what and when. People love to say corporate betrayal comes out of nowhere. No, it doesn't. It creeps. It tests you. It pushes a little at first, then harder, until one day you wake up and your boss is wearing your crown. That's what was happening to me, but I wasn't about to let her keep it. By the time HR finally told me, "Sorry, you're not on the bonus list," I had over 100 pages of documented proof that I was. And that binder? That was going to be the one thing Martha never saw coming. If part 1 was the betrayal, and part 2 was the paper trail, then part 3 is where the walls started closing in, where HR went from helpful colleagues to accomplices in the cover-up. It started with a meeting invite. Compensation clarification. 30 minutes. I walked in with my binder, calm, rehearsed. HR sat across from me. Two people, not one. Always a bad sign. One smiled too much, the other didn't look up from her notes, and sitting between them, Martha, my boss. They started soft. We understand there's been some confusion regarding the Q3 incentive program. Confusion. That word hung in the air like a bad perfume. I waited. Martha leaned forward, voice syrupy. OP, I know you worked really hard, but unfortunately the system shows your bonus paperwork wasn't submitted. I slid the printed PDF across the table. The one HR themselves had circulated. This policy says successful renewal equals a $100,000 payout. They didn't even blink. That was a preliminary draft. It wasn't finalized. So I pulled out Exhibit B, the VP of Sales email, CCing Martha, explicitly stating I'd get the full bonus if we renewed. Martha's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. HR jumped in. Well, sometimes VPs speak informally. It doesn't constitute binding policy. Okay, I thought, gloves off. I opened my binder to the Slack threads where Martha herself tagged me as point lead. Then to the client email, we renewed because of your leadership. I laid them on the table, one by one, like cards in a poker game. Martha shifted in her seat. HR frowned. We see the documentation, they said carefully, but there's a discrepancy. The bonus pool was reclassified as a leadership incentive, not an individual contributor incentive. And since you're not listed as leadership, you weren't eligible. I stared at them. Reclassified, that was the word? They hadn't erased the bonus. They just moved it, slid it into a different column on a spreadsheet where my name would never appear. It was elegant, bureaucratic theft. I asked, flat. And who authorized that reclassification? Silence. Martha tapped her pen against the table, like she was daring me to connect the dots. HR shifted in their seats. No answer. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't oversight. It was a plan. Martha had rerouted $100,000 into her own pocket, dressed it up as leadership incentive, and assumed I'd never be able to prove otherwise. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I was floating. Not angry, just weightless. Because when someone shows you how far they're willing to go, you stop fighting shadows. You start sharpening knives. The days that followed were surreal. Martha paraded around the office with a brand new Rolex, making sure the sleeve of her blouse was rolled just high enough for everyone to notice. At one happy hour, she actually toasted to the Northbridge renewal and to leadership bonuses paying off. Half the team clapped. The other half stared into their drinks. Nobody said a word. Meanwhile, HR kept stalling. We'll escalate your case next quarter. We're waiting on payroll to confirm. Legal is reviewing incentive structures. Every excuse stretched the timeline closer to the point where the bonus would vest and then vanish forever. It was death by delay. I didn't push back. Outwardly, I nodded, thanked them, and left the room. Inwardly, I was cataloging every stall tactic. I even noted the exact timestamps of their replies, because patterns matter, and patterns tell stories. One night, after another useless email chain, I sat at my kitchen table, binder open, coffee cold, and whispered out loud, "They think I'll give up." That was their strategy. Exhaust me. Bury me under corporate jargon until I stopped clawing at the door. But they'd miscalculated. See, I wasn't running out of energy. I was getting sharper, and the more they stalled, the more evidence piled up on my side. The turning point came when I checked version history on the bonus policy PDF. The final version HR claimed was definitive. It had been edited. The metadata showed Martha's account had logged in weeks after the all-hands and changed renewal incentive to leadership incentive. Not a clerical error, not an oversight, a deliberate edit, with her username, with her timestamp. When I saw that, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so stupidly arrogant. She hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. She thought the system was her playground. That night, I printed the metadata, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and added it to the binder. The binder was heavy now, literally. Over 100 pages of receipts, each one a nail in the coffin she was building for herself. Martha thought I was cornered. She had no idea she'd just trapped herself. If you've ever been blindsided by a boss, you know the temptation. Storm into their office, slam down your evidence, and watch them squirm. But that's a rookie move. Rage makes noise. Noise tips them off. What I needed wasn't noise. It was silence. Silence buys time. Silence builds cases. So that's what I did. I went quiet. On the outside, I played the role Martha expected, the overworked analyst keeping his head down. On the inside, I was documenting like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. First, I built redundancy. Screenshots weren't enough. I exported entire Slack threads with timestamps. I downloaded PDFs and ran them through hash generators, so I had digital fingerprints proving they hadn't been altered after the fact. I backed up emails to an encrypted drive, labeled by date, sender, and topic. Every piece of data had a twin, stored somewhere Martha could never reach. Then I layered legitimacy. Screenshots can be dismissed, metadata can't. I pulled file histories from SharePoint, showing exactly when renewal incentive became leadership incentive, complete with Martha's login credentials stamped on it. I pulled payroll SOPs from the company handbook, highlighted the clause that said policy changes must be reviewed by legal, and I had proof no legal review ever happened. Next, I built human corroboration. I reached out to Northbridge's COO, the same one who'd emailed, "We renewed because of your leadership." I thanked him for his partnership and casually asked if he'd be willing to provide a short statement for internal recognition. He agreed without hesitation. The statement he sent back, "Our decision to renew was a direct result of my name's leadership, attention to detail, and round-the-clock support." That was Exhibit C, notarized by the simple fact it came from a client, executive. I didn't stop there. I pulled call recordings from Zoom. Company policy required all executive war room calls to be recorded for compliance. Guess whose voice gave the go, no, go updates? Mine. Guess whose voice is conspicuously absent from critical calls? Martha's. She introduced herself at the start, then muted, disappearing while I fought fires. The contrast was brutal, and because I wasn't naive, I built legal insulation. I lived in a one-party consent state. That meant I could legally record conversations I was part of. So when HR repeated their favorite stall lines, "We'll escalate next quarter," the forms must have been lost. I had those lines captured, word for word. Calm, professional, but damning. The binder grew heavier by the week. Each section tabbed, indexed, cross-referenced. I joked to myself it looked like the world's angriest grad thesis. But it wasn't anger, it was precision. All the while, Martha thought she'd won. She strutted into meetings with that Rolex flashing under fluorescent lights, tossing around phrases like strategic oversight to describe work she hadn't touched. HR backed her up, parroting jargon so thin you could poke holes in it with a spoon. But here's the thing about arrogance. It blinds you. Martha thought I was just another cog she could grind down until I gave up. She didn't realize I was letting her build the rope she'd hang herself with. The final layer of my case wasn't data. It was timing. Dropping my binder on the wrong desk at the wrong time would just get me labeled a troublemaker. But dropping it when the company needed me most, that would flip the script. That moment was coming. QBR week. The week every executive panicked about renewals, projections, investor confidence. The week when nobody could afford bad press, compliance scandals, or missing revenue models. I circled the dates on my calendar like a hunter marking a full moon. Until then, I smiled. I nodded. I showed up early, left late, delivered flawless work. Let Martha believe her little heist was airtight. Let HR think their stall tactics were working. Because while they were busy covering tracks, I was digging a trench they couldn't climb out of. By the time QBR week hit, I wouldn't just have evidence, I'd have leverage. Corporate revenge stories always have a tipping point. Mine came the morning Martha tried to corner me in her office with a document already waiting on the desk. It was a performance improvement plan, a PIP. For those lucky enough not to know, it's HR speak for we're lining up your termination papers. And there it was, 3 pages of fabricated nonsense. Failure to collaborate, difficulty adapting to team leadership structure, concerns about interpersonal communication, pure fiction, all of it. Martha leaned back in her chair, Rolex catching the light, lips curled into that smug half-smile. "Sign this," she said casually, "and we'll work with you. Refuse, and I can't guarantee your future here." I almost laughed. She wanted me desperate. She wanted me so scared of losing my job that I'd forget about the 100,000, forget about the bonus policy, forget about the evidence binder that was already thick enough to crush her career. But instead of laughing, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm not signing." Her eyebrows twitched, just slightly, but it was the first crack in her mask I'd seen. "Then," she said, voice lower now, "you're making a serious mistake." I stood, smoothed the paper flat with one hand, and slid it back across the desk. No, the mistake was assuming I wouldn't keep records. Then I walked out. That single refusal changed everything. Suddenly, HR became less patient, their tone sharper in emails. The weekly follow-up meetings about my bonus disappeared. Instead, I got formal check-ins about behavioral alignment. Martha had pulled the oldest trick in the corporate playbook, flipped the script, turned the whistleblower into the problem. The funny part, it played right into my hands. Because every threat, every stall, every shift in tone was just more evidence. And thanks to state law, every word was on tape. A week later, I gave HR one final chance. I booked a meeting with my HR partner and slid a small stack of documents across the table. The VP's email, the policy PDF with metadata, the Slack exports. I didn't bring the whole binder, just enough to let them know what I had. "I'm asking you one last time to fix this quietly," I said. "Restore the bonus. Correct the records. Nobody outside this room needs to know." She glanced through the papers, pale, and said the line I'll never forget. "I'm not authorized to make those changes." Authorized, like fairness needed clearance codes, like honesty required a signature from the same people stealing from me. That was it. That was the moment I decided to take it above their heads. That night, I went home, opened my binder, and drafted a formal ethics report. Anonymous, but armed to the teeth. I attached every document, every screenshot, every metadata file. I even embedded the client's statement of support and labeled it Exhibit C. The whole package was cleaner than some legal cases. When I hit submit, the system pinged back a tracking number. My heart was hammering, but I felt calm, because I knew this wasn't just a complaint. It was a bomb, and it was timed perfectly. The next morning, I blind copied my personal attorney on an email to HR, attaching a pared-down version of the evidence. Nothing threatening, just polite. "For your awareness, I have filed a formal ethics report. Please ensure no retaliatory actions are taken." Every word was calm, professional, which made it 10 times more terrifying. And just like that, I stopped playing defense. See, Martha thought she could bleed me dry with delay. HR thought they could bury me under process. But now, the clock was running on them. Because QBR week was days away, and the board would be scrutinizing every executive decision, every dollar of bonus allocation, every client renewal justification. All I had to do was wait. Martha believed she'd pushed me into a corner. In reality, she'd just shoved me onto the high ground. And when the CEO asked the one question she couldn't fake, she was going to fall. Hard. Quarterly business review week. For most people, it's stressful. For Martha, it was supposed to be her victory lap. She strutted into the building in a designer suit, Rolex flashing, arms full of binders she hadn't written, slides she hadn't made. She was ready to take a bow for her Northbridge renewal, but what she didn't know was that I'd already set the stage. The night before, compliance had pulled my ethics report. I'd filed it anonymously, but they didn't need Sherlock Holmes to connect the dots. Metadata doesn't lie, and my evidence binder left a trail so clean it was impossible to ignore. They were reviewing while the execs were sipping coffee and rehearsing their numbers. The first crack appeared during the QBR itself. The CFO asked a simple question about the renewal. Why do our assumptions look different from the original client model? Martha clicked through slides she didn't understand, trying to bluff. Oh, those are from my team's framework. The CEO leaned forward. Your team? Who built the models? Martha froze for half a beat before forcing a smile. We collaborated. And then it happened. The permissions list popped up on the projector when she opened the file. My name, clear as day, listed as owner. Every change tracked. Every formula, every comment, every late-night update. Mine. Her name wasn't even on the document history. You could feel the air shift in the room. The CFO raised an eyebrow. Funny. Looks like OP's account did all the work. Silence. Then the compliance officer's phone buzzed. They glanced at it, frowned, and whispered to the CEO. A moment later, a folder was slid across the table. Inside, the missing bonus policy forms, complete with version history, showing exactly when Martha had changed renewal incentive to leadership incentive, her login, her timestamp, her digital fingerprints on the crime. The CEO picked up the folder, scanned it, and then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not polite amusement. A full, sharp laugh that cut through the boardroom. You've got to be kidding me, he said, still smiling. This is the sloppiest attempt at a bonus grab I've ever seen. Martha turned crimson. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The CEO slid the folder back toward compliance. Freeze the leadership bonus pool until this is sorted, and make sure whoever actually earned it gets paid, with penalties. Then he turned to me. OP, stay after this meeting. I want to hear your version. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just nodded and kept my expression calm. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the next 5 minutes of conversation. But I'll never forget Martha's face. The forced smile collapsing, the eyes darting for an exit that didn't exist. After the meeting, I sat down with the CEO, compliance, and the CFO. I laid out everything. Emails, Slack threads, client statements. I didn't editorialize, didn't add drama. I just showed the receipts. They spoke for themselves. The CEO shook his head. Incredible. You stayed quiet, kept working, and built a case while she thought she was untouchable. Then, with a grin that was half amusement, half contempt, she really thought she'd get away with this. That laugh wasn't at me. It was at her. At the arrogance. At the stupidity. At the fact that she'd practically gift-wrapped her own downfall. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because it was over. Not yet. But because the tide had finally turned. For once, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Martha was. And the storm that was about to hit her, she'd built it all by herself. The fallout didn't come all at once. It trickled in like water through a cracked ceiling, slow at first, then unstoppable. The morning after QBR, the rumor mill was already in overdrive. People whispered in the break room. Slack channels buzzed with, "Did you hear?" gifs. Nobody said Martha's name out loud, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. When the CEO laughs in a meeting, it travels faster than any email. Compliance moved fast. They interviewed me twice, each time in a small glass conference room with blinds pulled down. Both sessions were polite, but you could tell they weren't messing around. They wanted every detail. When the bonus was promised, who said what, who signed what, how the edits to the policy had been made. I slid over my binder, tabbed, and indexed. They didn't even hide their surprise at how airtight it was. Most employees don't document this thoroughly, one compliance officer said, flipping through the metadata printouts. I shrugged. Most employees don't have their bonus stolen. Meanwhile, HR was scrambling. Remember the partner who kept telling me, "We'll escalate next quarter"? She was suddenly out on leave. Whether it was voluntary or not, nobody knew. What I did know was that her name had popped up in the policy's version. History alongside Martha's. She hadn't stolen the money, but she'd helped grease the wheels. And now she was gone. Martha, though, she tried to fight. She sent long defensive emails about misunderstandings and misaligned expectations. She even implied that I had overstepped by taking ownership beyond my role. But every time she tried to twist the story, compliance slapped another receipt on the table. Slack exports, call recordings, client statements. The pile was too tall for her to climb. 2 weeks later, the official verdict landed. Though $100,000 was reinstated in full, interest was added because the payout had been delayed past the contractual window. A penalty adjustment was applied, bringing the total closer to $115,000. When payroll confirmed the deposit date, I just sat there staring at the number on the screen. After months of gaslighting, silence, and threats, the money was real, tangible. My rent, my dad's medical bills, my future secured. But that wasn't the end. The CEO called me into his office again. "We're making structural changes," he said carefully. "Effective immediately, Martha is being reassigned. She'll no longer have direct reports." Reassigned was corporate code for demoted into irrelevance until you quit. Within 3 months, she was gone. The official memo said she had chosen to pursue opportunities outside the company. People clapped when they read that email, not publicly, of course, but I got more hallway nods and Slack DMs that week than I'd had in my entire career. One coworker wrote, "Thank you for standing up. She's been doing this to people for years." It hit me then. I hadn't just won back my bonus. I'd pulled the mask off a pattern. The company didn't sweep it under the rug either. They quietly rolled out a new policy. All discretionary bonuses over $50,000 would trigger an automatic audit. Metadata logs would be reviewed. No more preliminary drafts disappearing. No more reclassifying money into hidden pools. The system that almost buried me had just been rewired to protect everyone else. And the sweetest irony? Martha didn't just lose her stolen $100K. She had to watch it leave her account. Compliance clawed back the money she'd redirected into her own leadership bonus. Imagine thinking you'd scored a 6-figure payday, buying luxury watches, bragging in happy hours, only to get the funds reversed like a bad charge. The Rolex? She sold it on eBay. People joked about it for weeks. Corporate karma doesn't always hit. Sometimes bad bosses skate away untouched. But this time, it hit like a freight train. And I didn't have to yell or fight or burn bridges to make it happen. I just had to be patient, meticulous, and let their arrogance do the heavy lifting. When the dust settled, I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was the guy who beat the system without raising his voice. And suddenly, leadership was asking how they could make sure I didn't walk out the door next. The strangest part about revenge is that when it finally lands, it doesn't feel explosive. It feels quiet, like the silence after a storm, when you realize the house is still standing and you can breathe again. That's what the aftermath was for me. The $115,000 hit my account the same week Martha's farewell email went out. I didn't throw a party. I didn't splurge on anything wild. I paid down debt, covered my dad's medical bills, and set aside enough to finally sleep at night without the numbers running through my head. Money doesn't solve everything, but it silences a lot of noise. What mattered more was what came after. The CEO called me in again, this time not as a witness, but as an asset. "We don't want to lose you," he said bluntly. "Name what you need to stay." For the first time in my career, I had leverage, real leverage. I asked for 3 things. 1, a title bump that reflected the work I was already doing. 2, a retention package with cash and RSUs. 3, a written policy change ensuring no one could ever have their bonus stolen the way I did. To my surprise, they agreed to all 3. Within weeks, I had a new title, a fatter paycheck, and, ironically, the job of redesigning the very bonus attribution system that had almost broken me. Now, instead of opaque discretionary pools, every contribution had to be tied to verifiable outputs. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword, it was policy, and the culture shifted. People who'd been quiet for years started speaking up. With Martha gone, a lot of old ghosts came crawling out. Stories of her taking credit, burying reports, sabotaging people she saw as threats. Turns out my case wasn't unique. It was just the first one with a paper trail she couldn't bury. But here's the part that still makes me smile. About a year later, I got a message from a recruiter. The company name rang a bell. I looked closer and laughed out loud. It was Martha's new employer. They were looking for someone to help design robust bonus governance frameworks. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. I didn't reply with anger. I didn't mention Martha. I just forwarded them the compliance guide my team had published, the one built from the wreckage she'd caused. Then I closed the email and went to dinner with friends. No gloating, no victory speeches, just peace. Because the real win wasn't the money or the title, or even watching Martha crash. The real win was walking away from that mess knowing I didn't let their corruption change who I was. I didn't sink to their level. I stayed calm, patient, and precise, and let the truth do the damage for me. Now, whenever people ask why I document everything, why I keep receipts, why I never rely on promises without paper, I tell them this story, and I tell them the same line I told myself the night I started building that binder. Receipts are the one thing they can't take away from you. In the end, that binder didn't just save my bonus, it saved me. And somewhere out there, Martha is probably still explaining to interviewers why her last job ended so abruptly. Meanwhile, I'm busy building a career on integrity and sleeping just fine. That's the end of the story. A clean ending, no cliffhangers, just quiet satisfaction, justice delivered, and a little poetic irony.